Doctor-assisted suicide. Is it really about saving dignity or saving money? We're going to talk about that today on the Woman to Woman Show. I'm Luann. Come on and join us.
My humanity found, God's perfection is self, and when love always abounds, then I'll reach out for your help. Saying up, all down, saying up, all down, saying up, all down, saying up, all down. In the stillness of my soul, where nobody knows, containing all my fears, containing all my tears.
Hi, welcome to the Woman to Woman Show. We're here today to talk about something that, frankly, in Oregon, we have to talk about. I'm here with Dr. Bill Toffler, excuse me, putting on my glasses here, who is National Director of Physicians for Compassionate Care and Professor of Family Medicine at OHSU. Welcome to the show, Doctor.
Well, thank you very much, Luann. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you. You know, driving in today, I couldn't help thinking, I can't believe I'm coming to talk about this issue. Physician-assisted suicide has been a reality here in Oregon for a number of years.
10 years.
10 years,
The 10th
okay.
year anniversary was just yesterday.
Okay. If you would just kind of give an overview for the people out there that may be kind of confused, they've kind of heard it and kind of not, and they really don't know Suicide Oregon Legal, what is it all about and how does it affect me? If you could kind of bring us up to date and go back and say, what is the law that passed?
Sure.
What does the law say that you can do? And what motivated you then to start Physicians for Compassionate Care and oppose this?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, assisted suicide is legal in the state of Oregon, and it has been since the initial law was passed in 1994. It was held up in courts for several years and then ultimately was released from the courts as being a reasonable thing to do from a legal point of view. And so we're now carved out as a separate state apart from the other 49 states where I'm empowered as a doctor in the state of Oregon to give a massive overdose of barbiturates to some patients under whatever arbitrary circumstances. And in '94 we were caught off guard. I don't think anyone in their wildest dreams imagined that it would really pass, that people would embrace the situational killing of people who are labeled terminal. You know, as though they should be treated differently than the rest of us, who, by the way, also are terminal. We're all terminal.
Well, 100% of people do die.
Well, indeed.
Last we heard.
And the ability of a doctor to predict, as though we have a crystal ball reading course in medical school. And I teach in medical school. We have no such course. And in fact, the studies show that doctors are really poor at being able to predict exactly when someone's going to die until it gets to be within the last 2 weeks. In fact, it's a lot better if it's within a few days that we get more accurate. But beyond that, everyone has a story about a doctor having said...
They sure do. I've got them in my family.
My mother was told she only had 3 months to live, and it's 17 years later. It shows the arrogance, the chutzpah, if you will, of some people who believe that someone's life is going to imminently die, and define imminent. In the state of Texas, imminent means a year. So in our state, we now have an empowering of doctors as a carve-out, the only government in the Western Hemisphere that does this. And the good news is that we in Physicians for Compassionate Care and other groups have tracked and monitored the problems that have leaked out, emerged from underneath the shroud of secrecy that envelops what's really going on in Oregon. And we've educated other states, as we did just a few weeks ago in the state of Washington, where one of my colleagues, Dr. Ken Stevens, and I had gone with groundwork to educate doctors. So the Washington State Medical Association soundly rejected assisted suicide or going neutral on it.
They were a little smarter.
Which is kind of, exactly.
They were a little
The
smarter.
first step in Oregon was exactly that, trying to get the doctors to be neutral, meaning that get them out of the way as leaders and guides to society about what is ethical as a standard in practice of medicine.
And I don't know how many people remember, and I didn't save a copy, it's kind of a historical document, I guess, of the original ballot measure, but I remember it had wording that made me really, really upset, because didn't it have something to say, if I remember correctly, should terminally ill patients be allowed to blah, blah, blah. Well, the first thing you read is, oh my gosh, a terminally ill person, that should be allowed to do anything, the poor things.
Sure.
Isn't that how they did it?
That way, as well as the euphemism, death with dignity,
Yeah.
the so-called death with dignity. Well,
Right.
I believe in death with dignity.
Who wouldn't?
But I don't believe in empowering doctors to give massive overdoses to kill patients. That's a different story. And if you had
Yeah.
people clearly vote on the King's English rather than the euphemistic bowel measure, which
Right.
encaptures
It wouldn't
this
fly.
image of can terminal people decide to do what they want.
Yeah,
Well, they
yeah.
have that power in every state. I mean, people can end their lives, and in fact do.
Right.
In fact, in Oregon, we have a task force because we're among the league leaders in suicide, just plain
Of course
suicide.
we are.
We're the fourth. and the people who advocate for assisted suicide say, oh, well, that's not the same thing. Well, if the mentality is that if life gets difficult,
Yes.
it's okay to end your life,
Right.
that is extant, then why would you question that somebody who's in their 30s would end their life?
Well,
You
right.
teach them the solution to life's difficulties
It's
is to end your
cheapening
life.
life. And let's go back to this measure that passed. They talk about, oh, it's just under these really, really rare circumstances. It's
Sure.
just, it's not going to be a big deal. Tell exactly what
Sure.
the provisions are for,
The
for
so-called
this.
safeguards are that
Yeah.
you have to be a resident of Oregon. And of course, how do you define that? It's not defined in the Act. Of
Okay.
course, I
It's
suppose
not
that
defined.
means
I can be staying with my friend.
And I say I'm a resident of Oregon, and I have
okay.
an address, and you're now a resident.
I
you
call
could, you could
myself a
register to
resident.
vote using that same
Got it.
address.
Yeah.
You can get a license by saying the same thing. So we already know of cases. They've already been written up
Yeah.
of people who've come to this state from other states. Now, of course, that's not in the Oregon Health Division's records or the Department of Human Services because they don't ask about that. They just they use an address and they're able to come here. So it's already been recorded, and this was
So,
done by
flimsy
Dr. David Jeffries,
right
who
there.
actually interviewed many people who, by the way, are promoters of assisted suicide. He specifically asked people who don't feel as I do, and these are the facts that he
Yeah.
found and were published in his
Yeah.
paper that he wrote under
Got
a
it.
Churchill Scholarship, a Churchill Fellowship from the UK. So it's very credible evidence to shows that there are many things that are outside of these so-called safeguards. So residence the first thing.
Okay, so they say you got to be a resident.
Then you have to
That's-
request it orally. You have to put it in writing, and there
Put
have
it
to
in
be
writing.
15 days apart between two
Okay.
separate requests.
Okay.
And then, of course, they have to have a second opinion. And now there's a network of people who are very much active promoters of assisted suicide.
Oh, yeah.
Not the majority of doctors. There were 40 who wrote prescriptions last year, and there may
Okay.
be, 50 or 60 out of the 8 to 10,000 active practicing
I was just going to say
physicians.
how many practicing,
Right.
8 to
Now-
10,000.
Now, many doctors are either tacitly supportive of this or neutral, but there are only a handful that are active, and so much so that some of my colleagues, some of the people I work with,
Yeah.
have attended 8 deaths.
Oh.
Now, if you think about that, with a denominator of thousands of physicians, the chance that any one doctor would attend 8 or even 40 deaths, as some of them have done,
Yeah.
then you know that they really are sort of specializing
Yeah,
in
they-
developing a thanatology practice, a
Do you
practice
think
of...
that goes on their business card? I don't know. I specialize in death. I don't know.
I think there should be an openness about that. I mean, I once had
Yeah, let's come
someone
out
from
and say it.
from the ethics
Selling point here.
ethics center at OHSU come and say, well, maybe Dr. Toffler, you don't do certain things.
Yeah.
Let's put a sign in the office so that people will know and they won't be bothered
I like
because you
that.
don't. And I said I did too. In fact, it's such a good idea. Why don't we put a sign up for all the doctors about what they do and they don't do?
I agree.
And that would be transparent, and I think that would allow patients
Yeah.
to know who are they actually seeing. What's the philosophy of the doctor? Do they do abortions? Do they do assisted suicide?
Yeah.
And if they do, is that the doctor you want?
Instead of not made in China, it's not going to kill you. I like
Well,
that.
and the point
Yeah.
is that, this isn't a progressive idea. It's actually recapturing an idea that was alive and well 2,400 years ago.
Wouldn't you think? Yeah.
And that's why there was a Hippocratic tradition saying this is an inherent conflict of interest.
Conflict, yeah.
You'll often hear, Luann, it's those Christians imposing their morality.
Oh, yeah.
Well, 2,400 years ago, it was a pagan era. There was no Christianity.
I think that's great to bring that out.
And they basically had recognized the inherent conflict of interest of healthcare professionals giving hemlock to patients. Somehow we seem to have failed to study our own history as a medical profession.
Well, we
And-
know it's being rewritten.
well,
in
in
textbooks all
Oregon,
the
we
time, and-
are
yeah.
definitely